going to introduce the last of the important operations. There's lots of important operations in computer programming, but there are three that you really have to have. Sequential. So, for example, these three commands right here are in order. They're sequential. You have to have looping commands. And the third thing that you need to have in order to write a computer program, absolutely must have, are conditional. So we're going to talk about conditional statements. Before I introduce the idea of conditional, I'm first going to introduce a new operation in Python. It's the modulo operator, and what it does is it computes the remainder when you do division. I'm actually going to get rid of this for a second. So we're going to ignore this procedure up here and just print out these modular arithmetic operations. So I want to run even or odd. Come up here and select even or odd. I've already ran it once, so it's in my menu, and I'm going to run it, and I get the output 1, 2, 4. So how does that work? Well, if you divide 2 into 5, the remainder is 1. If you divide 3 into 5, the remainder is 2. And if you divide 5 into 9, the remainder is 4. So what this modulo operator does is compute the remainder when you do a division. Okay, so how am I going to use that? Well, I'm going to call a procedure up above, EO, which stands for even or odd. We're going to check to see if a number is even or odd. And one way to check to see if a function is even or odd is to divide it by 2. If you divide by 2 and the remainder is 0, then it's even. And if it's not 0, then it's odd. So let's see what happens. So we go up here to the definition of even or odd, and we have a new statement here, if. If is what's called a conditional. So if, it's going to check the stuff that's after this, and if that's true, then it will execute the code here, and if that's not true, then it won't. It'll go on to the next line. In this case, there's an else. An else captures everything else. So if this is not true, then you're automatically going to do what's down here. So what we're checking here is we take the number x, we divide it by 2, and get the remainder. And if the remainder is 0, we say, oh, that number is even. And so we take the number, print the number out as a string, and concatenate that with is even. The string is even. Otherwise, we say the number is odd. So remember, string takes a number and converts it into a string. And that means that after that we can concatenate with another string is even. So let's see how this works. We'll run it again. Don't know that we need these anymore, so we can go ahead and delete those. And let's see what we get. So even, 2 should be even. And it says 2 is even. So we call this, it comes up here, it divides 2 by 2, takes the remainder. The remainder is 0. So it goes into this set of code down here, and we can have more than one line in here. We can put another line down here, like this. Okay, so we can have more than one line of code in here, but it goes inside this execution block and executes the code inside of the if statement. So it converts that x into a string and concatenates onto that the is even. Let's run it again. And then when it's done with that, it does not, it skips over the else, goes to the end of the procedure. This end of the procedure then goes back to the main program, and then we're done. So it stops executing. If I change this to a 3, then we find that we go up here, it does the modular arithmetic. 3 divided by 2 has a remainder of 1, which is not 0. So it doesn't execute this code block. This is only executed if this happens to be true. It's false. The remainder of 3 divided by 2 is 1. It goes down to this else command and prints out the number as a string concatenated with is odd. Okay, so another thing to notice here is we have this double equal sign. And we mentioned this, I think, before, but in computer science there's two kinds of equals. There's an assignment equal, where you set something equal to each other, and then there's a check. Are these two things equal? And we have to distinguish between those two. The computer needs to know, do you want to make this thing equal? If I put a single equals here, that means I'm trying to set this equal to 0, which is not a good idea. Double equals means I'm checking, are these two things equal to 0? This is something that commonly gets people in trouble. You forget the double equals and bad things are going to happen. So pay attention to that when you're doing a conditional and if you want a double equals. Okay, so I'm going to come over now and we have a new program called pets. And what pet does is we have a procedure up here, my pet's name, and you pass to my pet's name the type of pet, a cat, a dog, frog, squirrel, or whatever else, and it will print out the name of the pet that I have for that kind of animal. Okay, so this is used to illustrate a different kind of if statement. So for the first if the pet happens to be a cat, then we're going to print out my pet's name is Gemini. I have a cat named Gemini. This means else if. So if you have a bunch of different conditions, you might use an else if statement. So what this says is, well, you checked and you didn't get a cat, so now check to see if you get dog. Notice the double equal sign again. So if it happens to be dog, then you say my pet's name is Scroopy. Notice in here I didn't write out my pet's name. I could have written here as a string, my cat's name is Gemini. Instead, I chose to use the variable pet. There's a reason for that, and we'll see that when we look at a different version of this. And pet is a string, so I can concatenate that with my pet's name is. Okay. Sorry, I got sidetracked. So we check to see if it's a dog. We know it's not a cat. We check to see if it's a dog. My dog's name is Scroopy. We print that out. If it's not a cat or a dog, so it checks against cat checks against dog, it doesn't get either of those two, it comes down to the next else if and checks to see if it's a frog. And if it's a frog, my frog's name is Flypaper. I actually don't have a frog, but let's go with that. If it's none of those, so it checks this, then it checks to see if it's a squirrel. I also don't have a pet that's a squirrel, but my dog does chase squirrels and tries to catch them, so we're going to call the squirrel Scroopy Chow, my dog's name. And finally, if you can have as many else's here as you want, as many as you're willing to type, but when you're done, at the end of this, you should always have a final else. This is a catch-all. This says if there was nothing else up above, what am I going to do? So you should always have an else on the end of this if you're going to have some else-if statements. You may have an if by itself, but if you're going to have else-ifs, you really should have an else to catch something that falls through and doesn't fit any of the conditions above. So in this case, the else says, okay, it's not a cat, it's not a dog, it's not a frog, it's not a squirrel. What else do I have? And we just say, I don't have a pet of that kind. Down here, I'm going to call pet's name with the different types of pets that I could have, just to check that it's working properly. And I also call it with the word house, just to point something out. I mean, ideally, we're calling this with a pet's name, but nowhere in here did we check to see, or a pet type, not a pet name, did we check to see if you're actually calling it with a pet. So you can call this with any string, and I chose to call it with a string house, and it will run with that. So let's go ahead and run. No, we don't want to run even or odd anymore. We want to run pets. So we'll run pets. And what we find out is my cat's name is Gemini, my dog's name is Scroopy, frog's name is Flypaper, squirrel's name is Scroopy Chow, and I don't have a pet that's an elephant, and I don't have a pet that is a house. Now, this isn't exactly related to the conditionals and the if, else setup, but I do want to point out that in 3 or 4 different places, I'm basically printing out the same kind of string. The only difference is here I've got Gemini, here I've got Scroopy, here I've got Flypaper, and here I've got Scroopy Chow. If you're doing that kind of thing in 4 different places, that's actually a perfect opportunity to use another procedure. So I rewrote this in Pets 2, and I still have my pet's name. The only difference is when I find out what kind of pet I have, for example, cat, I call print pet. And I need 2 things. I need the type of pet, cat, dog, frog, whatever, and the name. So I'm going to pass it the name Gemini, Scroopy, Flypaper, Scroopy Chow. And then up here in print pet, well, and then the last one is I don't have this kind of pet, so I use a built-in Python word called none. None's a neat little thing. It just means, look, I don't have that case, so this is built into Python. Feel free to use it. The name here is completely irrelevant, so I just use Beeblebop. And then we come up here to print pet. We get two parameters, pet and name. It checks to see if we have pet equal to none. Actually, this is pet not equal. If we put an exclamation point there with a not equal, we get none. And in that case, I want to print my, with a space, plus the type of pet, which is a string, plus name is, plus then the name, which I'm passing as a parameter, and then a new line. This is otherwise, so this is in the case where we have none, which means we don't have that kind of pet, and we're just going to print out I don't have a pet of that kind. Okay, so I'm going to run this again. Actually, I haven't run this yet, so I need to come up here to this version of run, and we'll run pets2. And we get the same output. I don't have a pet of that kind in the last two. We seem to have a problem here. So what's the problem? It's printing out none. Let's see. Why is it printing out none Beeblebop for oh, that's because I tell it to print none Beeblebop. What I wanted was print pet, didn't I? Okay, so let's try this again. There we go. I don't have a pet of that kind. That's what we wanted to see. Now I purposefully, and I claim purposefully, left a bunch of little tick marks over here. Let's check some of these. Missing white space after comma. When you call a function or a procedure with two variables, it always likes to see a comma after that, or a space. I'm sorry, so I'm going to get dinged a whole bunch of times for not putting a space in between my comma and the next parameter. So I'll get rid of a whole bunch of boxes there. What else we got? Missing white space after operator. Where's that? Oh, after the plus for the concatenation of those two strings, and wants another space. That's what it means by white space. And then we have one more ding here. I almost didn't use none because of this. I thought this might get confusing, but then I decided to go ahead and use it anyways. So let's click more. And basically it says when you're using the special built-in none, instead of using the equals or not equals, you should use is or is not. For some reason, we're not going to go into the details here, but instead of using not equals, it wants us to type is not, none. And then let's run it one more time. Runs great. So what we've done is changed all those other print commands to one procedure, print pet. There's an advantage to this. For example, if I wanted to change this period on the end to an exclamation point, I don't have to do it in one place, up here in print pet. In the other version, I'd have 4 different places to change that. So if I want to change the formatting around in this, it's easy to do. It's one spot. If I need to add more pets, it makes the calling it a lot easier. So this was more an example of showing you again the power of functions, and also throwing in this special case of none, which we can also use. Okay, another example, cool cars. So in this example, we're going to print out if a car is cool or not based on the type of car and its color. So this is a use of nested conditionals. If statements are called conditionals. We're going to pass to a procedure is cool, the car type and the color, and then we're going to check a few things. So just remember I made this up. First we check to see if it's a Mustang. I used to own a Mustang. I think they're cool. We check to see if the color is grabber orange. That's a very old kind of color from the late 60s, early 70s. And if it is a Mustang, that happens to be grabber orange. Oops, I'm missing white space here. It's going to yell at me. Then we say that's a really awesome car. Otherwise, if it's not grabber orange, it's still a Mustang, so it's still a cool car. I'm missing white space. I'm talking as I put in spaces here. Getting rid of some of those boxes on the side. If it's a Camaro, Camaros are okay. If it's a red Camaro, then that's a cool car. We're good there. If it's black Camaro, pretty tough, so we pronounce tough car. And notice the way I'm doing this. I'm not saying, I could just type out in this print command the entire string. A Mustang is a cool car. A grabber orange Mustang is a really awesome car. I could just type that string out as is, but I chose to use the color, which was passed as a parameter, and the car, which is passed as a parameter, as strings, and concatenate them in. Setting myself up to, I could make a procedure up here to print something about the car. Okay, if it's not red or it's not black, so here we have the if-else-if condition. And notice that we're nesting these. I'm first checking to see Mustang, then I'm checking color. So I can have if statements inside of if statements. In this case, we're looking at the Camaro, and we have the if, else, else. So we have three conditions here: red, black, or something else. Still a cool car. Oh, I guess I should have done something else if it was a red. Well, anyways. And then the final condition is, you know what, I didn't check for anything but Mustang or Camaro, so you get might be cool, might not, don't really know. Okay, so what happens if I run this? Now I've got a bunch of different possibilities here. So this is good code testing. Test all the possibilities, make sure they all work. So I'm testing Mustang grabber orange, Mustang blue, Mustang some other color. Notice again, we don't check to actually see if somebody passes us a color for color. So I can throw any sentence and phrase, whatever I want in there, any string. Camaro red, Camaro black, Camaro green, and a Bugatti Veyron black. Ooh. And then finally, again, we don't test to see if we're actually calling with a car and a color. So I can, in fact, pass cable television, which is not a car. So let's see what happens if we run this, cool cars. And we get a grabber orange Mustang is really awesome. Blue Mustang is cool. An oops Mustang or a oops Mustang, that's a cool car. So it doesn't check the color. All it knows is it's a Mustang. So it comes in here, says Mustang. Color's not grabber orange because the color is oops. Goes to the else and prints this. So this line right here, a oops Mustang is a cool car, is actually printed from that command right there. And once that else is completed, it finishes this if block and then skips the else if and the else and goes to the end of the procedure. Done. Okay. Red Camaro, cool car. Black Camaro, cool car. Black Veyron. Okay, Veyron is not one of these choices, so it comes down here to this else. Might be cool, might be not. Program doesn't know. We know Veyrons are cool. Television cable, well, may or may not. It's actually not even a car, but the program doesn't check for that. Okay, so hopefully that helps you understand a little bit how you can do conditionals in Python. You can check a condition to see if it's true or not, and based on whether it's true or not, you can execute further code, or you can choose to do something else.